morning on this first topic I'm covering for Lyndon Parker, so I don't have a PowerPoint for it. I'm familiar with the topic, and it's a pleasure to. It's fascinating how it's a pleasure to look at laws. When somebody says law, there's a law. How do you feel? What's the first feeling that comes to the surface? Anybody? Safety. Safety? Somebody else. It's okay to say something kind of different.
Seclusion. Seclusion?
Seclusion. No.
Resistance?
Yeah. I was hoping somebody would. Why?
Well, you don't want to have rules. You just want to do what you want to do.
You want to do what you want to do. And if you tell me you may not, or you must, or you may not, there's something in us that, but what did you say?
Resistance. No.
You said safety. Safety. And does anybody at all think of freedom? Okay.
Usually not the first thought, but as you think about it.
Why? Why is there freedom?
Because you're following the law. There's a reason for the law, and it's the end result is your freedom.
Great. And so, my analogy to yesterday was, you know what, the roads are racing, but you can get there. You know, I was playing with Texas. A couple things: flat and straight, empty roads. Hey, I mean, if you have to drive in a skating rink, you can drive in a skating rink, so long as if all you have to do is go straight, and the roads aren't crooked, and there's not too much wind. We did reach one place yesterday where the crosswind, and it was straight, and we felt ourselves going like this. And so, if you know the laws governing something, and you're within those laws, you're free to accomplish, you're free to fly. I'm free to fly home tomorrow. And it's because of laws of aerodynamics, and the engineers who designed those planes designed them in a certain way so that we're free to actually fly home. And without laws, we're helpless. So, tell me, how does this thing work? And so we can go on. So there are laws governing the universe, and whether these are laws of physics and science, or whether it's the law of everything produced after its own kind. When you read your rabbits, you don't have to fear. I hope the rabbits. I hope we don't have kittens, because rabbits make rabbits, and that's the laws of the universe. And also, then there are other laws, such as the law of sowing and reaping, or a friend loveth at all times. That's simply what a friend is. And so, there are laws. Now, if you teach students, and the students learn. Oh, and by the way, I don't have a PowerPoint for this, but there is a page in your book if you want to jot in the notes down. On page 6 is the note page for this particular session, in case you want to take a notes. If your students learn because of your teaching, you did follow some laws. And in many cases, we follow laws unwittingly, whether we know it or not. And so, of course, children will learn by experience. That's part of playing. When children are playing, they're discovering the laws that govern life. So they take a corner too fast and they slide on the stove and they fall and skin the knee. And they discover, without it articulating it, that when you're on gravel, you don't take a corner as fast as if you're on, say, blacktop. And they wouldn't be able to say it's because of the gravel can roll like little ball bearings. And they just learn by experience that you don't have as much friction. And so they do follow the laws. If you're playing tag and you don't follow them, you did follow the law. And so with teaching also, if we violate laws, it results in failure. And so as we talk about what we're doing here in this session is articulating, we're talking about things that all good teachers, they just do. And it's fascinating to ponder what you do when you do well as a teacher. Now, it is true that following these laws does not guarantee success. There are other factors, as in you can follow, going back to driving, you can follow the laws as well as you can, but if somebody darts out in front of you, there's no way you can anticipate that. And things will still happen. Or if there's an unseen war, you drive across a bridge that you thought was safe, and it isn't, and it falls down. Well, you can't anticipate that. And so, and that's true that in the classroom, there are issues that arise. There are children that come to school with issues that are just different. And the normal procedures that you follow doesn't work. So, I mean, obviously, for example, if you thought the children could all hear, and there's a deaf child in the classroom, and you speak, they're not going to hear you. Well, that's something you have to go forward. So, you have to do something different in that situation. And so there are other factors besides these other issues, besides these laws. And we cannot control circumstances beyond our control. So don't think that just because you follow these laws, all children will learn in the normal way. However, if you don't follow the laws, you can't assume that anyone will. And so, understanding and following them actually does free us up to teach successfully. Now, in the 7 laws, Gregory points out that there are 2 basic characteristics of infants, of children, and that need to be addressed in order for them to grow up and mature. The one is they are ignorant, and that's said in a positive way. Ignorant, that means there's many things they simply don't know. So they must be taught. They don't even know their name unless you tell them. And then the other one is that they are immature. There are skills that they have not developed. And this could be skills from being able to reach out with a hand and take a hold of something to just the things that they can do to speak. And so generally teaching involves 2 major aspects. Teachers do 2 major things. They deal with the ignorance by teaching children to know things. A lot of that has to do with the mind and also the emotions. And then they also deal with immaturity by helping them develop skills, whether it's physical skills like walking, jumping, and running, or whether it's skills like adding and subtracting, or skills of speaking, skills of calculation, skills of developing your language, ability to speak, and so forth. And so children have potential abilities, and therefore the 2 major aspects of teaching, if you can think of the 2 sides, on one side we would have this unknowing, this ignorance, and you teach and you give them knowledge, you teach them to know. On the other side, with the immaturity and lack of training, we develop skills through practice, and that involves training. And so much of our work involves teaching and training. And oftentimes we put them under the umbrella of teaching. But there is something different between training and teaching. A person who is taught knows something. There's several levels of knowing. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't. You can know how to write well. That doesn't mean you write neatly. You can know how to solve problems to get accurate answers, but that doesn't mean that you get accurate answers. Because you might not care. You might not want to be troubled to do it. And of the 2 tasks, teaching and training, probably the training is the more challenging one. How do you, a person who's trained, if you trained, you do it. If you haven't been trained, you don't do it. So a trained pony, a trained dog will do he's trained to do. You say sit up, he will sit up. If you say sit up and he just looks the other way, well, he hasn't been trained yet to do it. So, teaching and training. And both are needed. Many of us, as teachers, it's kind of fun and invigorating to do the teaching part, to do the explaining part, the demonstration part, the illustration part, and this training part, getting the what to working and getting the children to actually do it. That's more difficult. It's part of teaching. And so the teacher's work basically is to cause the children to understand and to do it. You know, this passage in, I guess it's Nehemiah, where they read in the book of the law, they read, and then some men stood there, it says, and they caused the people to understand. And it's fascinating, what does a teacher actually do to cause the children to understand? So that's kind of an overview of the whole idea of these laws, and Gregory has identified 7. Now, I suppose another person could identify 8 or 5. 7 is kind of a nice number, that's what he came up with. So it's a good working number. But it's very logical in a way. I'll talk here about these first two, the teacher and the learner. It's kind of logical. You teach, you have somebody teaching, and you have somebody who's learning. And then in a later session, we'll talk about the 2 major tools that we use. That is the language and the must be common to teacher and learner, and then the lesson that you're actually teaching. And then later, we look at, so what actually happens in the classroom? What do you actually see happening? That's the teaching process. And what does the teacher do? Do you dance? Do you shout? Do you scold? What do you do? And the student, what does the student do? And finally, the last action is the review. And just a little bit of just one little comment on the review. The first time that you study something, you're often so focused on what is being taught that you have no time or energy left for looking at all the other things surrounding you. In fact, if you did look at the things surrounding you, you might miss the main point. But after you've gotten the key point, then when you review it, you have the main point kind of under your belt. Now you can actually look at some of the surroundings and they connect with the main point, and it starts to unfold and be enriched, and you make connections to other things. And so review is a very powerful part of teaching. When we say review, we're not just talking about reciting and repeating verbatim things that you've learned. All right, so to look then at the law of the teacher, getting into the first one here. The first law says in simple words that the teacher must know that which he would teach. Teacher must know that which he would teach. And if you don't know that which you would teach, you can't teach it. And if you've ever been asked to teach, especially in our Christian day schools, you probably know the feeling of being asked to teach something that you can't do. If you asked me to teach Algebra 2, I said one time, someone asked me, I was speaking about something. I forget what the context was. I just said I'm working on the frontiers of my knowledge. It's fun to have any frontiers. Well, everybody has frontiers, but the fascinating part of teaching is that you have to look at what you're being asked to teach and think about how you go about teaching this. And I recall one time when I took a class on a little walk. It was a section of a trail in our town that the county park had purchased, and they opened the trail for the first time to the public. Now, if you ever take a group of students on a hike somewhere, or going to go on a field trip somewhere, it's always helpful to go on there yourself first, so that you know the terrain and you know what's coming. And this time, I didn't walk that section. I knew where it was. I knew about what to expect, but I had never seen it before myself. And so here we were walking down this trail all together for the first time. For me, it was for the first time. For them, it was for the first time. And I was a teacher. Now you tell me, how could you serve in the role of a teacher if you're walking through terrain that you've never walked through before? Give me some ideas. How could you tell that I was a teacher and not that? Other than my exercise or what?
Maybe asking you questions.
Okay. They might ask me questions. And suppose I haven't been there, they might ask me, what's around last quarter? I don't know, because I haven't been there. So how could I respond? You have many modes of teaching. And one of the modes, so you have to teach in a different mode if you're in that. If you're going into territory that's new for all of you, but you're the teacher, what mode could you use? Yes?
Feed their curiosity.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think might be ahead? Let's go see.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
I was going to say discovery mode.
Discovery. Mm-hmm. It's a synonym. The word I have in mind is adventure. We are on an adventure. We're going to see what's around the next corner. And you can show them how to approach unknown territory. There are ways of approaching this. We will, maybe it's a historical thing. We knew there are some, maybe you anticipate some ruins of an old iron furnace. And so as you come around the bend and you see here's some ruins. Okay, so you as a teacher, you see ruins. Oh, wow, what do you think that is? Okay, you might have a pretty good idea. Then you ask them, what do you think that? Wow, it's ruins. Is it was built by men? How do you know it was built by men? Well, it's blocks there and so on. What might this have been? And so you demonstrate to them how to go about even looking at and taking in something that you see for the first time. Is that a worthwhile thing to teach? Yes. Much of life involves that, right? You come upon something you never came upon before. What do you do? What are some ways of looking at something you've never seen before? So the adventure mode is actually very exciting. In fact, as a teacher, you ought to design some settings in which you lead your students into territory that you've not been in yourself before, because you are genuinely interested without having to put on a show. And so, if you're asked to teach a content topic, maybe it might be in science, and you're asked to teach something about squids, okay, so there's something on squids and octopuses, and you don't know a whole lot about them except that they have eight legs and kind of squishy. And so, well, you can at least have some ways of looking at it. We're going to consider the body structure, and we're going to compare them to some things that we already know. We know something about fish, so we're going to see how these things compare to fish. So there are ways of approaching a new unknown topic along with your students. So backing up then to this teacher, you must know your subject. Well, yes, you must know. There are certain things that you really have to know how to do. If you're going to teach students how to add fractions with unlike denominators, you're going to have to maybe burn some midnight oil. I remember teaching Algebra 1. I had Algebra 1 when I went to school, but when you go to teach it, all you have is algebra 1 and you haven't studied beyond what you're teaching. When you have to teach it, it's different from just having to do it yourself. And I remember working through some problems. The answer key's there's the answer, but how do you get from here to here? I remember sometimes it's simply hard work. You have to work through it to get it. And when you get it, why? Then there's an acceleration. You must know that what you would teach. Now, there are many styles of teaching, many types of teachers. And you don't have to be a particular type. Some teachers are somewhat flamboyant and dramatic. Other ones are cool, calm, and collected. Some like to talk a lot. Some don't talk more than they need to, other than to give the direction. And all types of personalities can be good teachers. There isn't any particular type of personality that's necessarily a better teacher than another. But they must know the lesson. And another part of this, and this is especially true for the experienced teacher and the teacher who's really knowledgeable, there's a sense in which extensive knowledge and extensive ability can be a handicap for a teacher. If you quote know-it-all for purposes of illustration, let's just suppose you know it all and you know how to do it, it's easy. What problem is that, or are you likely to have as a teacher? Empathy for the ability to understand what it is about this that you have difficulty getting. And because to me it might seem so simple, but regardless, the simpler it seems to me, that can be a problem. It's often been said that the B students make better teachers than the A students. The students got all A's through school, one of the good teachers is the B students. The A students, and they don't have a clue how this could be difficult for anybody. And the B students, they were able to get it, but they had to work for it. And they were able to get it, but they didn't ace it. So they're, but another one is you must know that what you would teach. If you consider what you know, in any given class, you can only teach a certain amount. And let's say you have 1,000 things here that you can talk about or explain. But in this class, out of those 1,000, there's only 2. Because more than that would be confusing. And so the teacher needs to know that what he would teach. Which 2 things are we looking at today? And will I discipline myself to stay with those 2 things rather than wandering all over the place and perhaps confusing the students by referring to other things? And so, yes, you must know that what you would teach, and you must know that specific skill what you would teach. Now, let's think a bit about knowing. So, what does it mean to know something? Gregory outlines in his book 4 different levels of knowing. And I think they're rather descriptive. The first one he calls faint recall. There's 4 levels of knowing. Number 1 is faint recall. So, for example, I ask you, what's photosynthesis? Oh, well, we studied about it in school one time. It has something to do with the leaves. And I think it's that thing about sunlight shines on leaves and they make food. That's about it. So there's a faint recall. You're in the ballpark. And by the way, that's a valuable kind of knowing. Don't denigrate it. That's what E.D. Hirschler called cultural literacy. You don't need to know a lot about something. But just knowing, somebody says, You know, the French Revolution, you just know a few things, tremendous upheaval, fighting back and forth, and revolutionary thinking, a change in thinking. A faint knowledge about many things helps you to orient yourself in the world around you, and also helps you even in communicating with other people. But this is the one level of knowing, faint recall. So, photosynthesis. Yes, it has something to do with sunlight, plants, leaves, but you really, somebody asked you to talk about it, that's about all you can say. You really you wouldn't have words to explain what this is. And then the second level, level 2, is the ability to describe. The ability to describe. And this is the level in which you could actually use words to describe some things that happen, let's say photosynthesis. So you can say, for example, well, photosynthesis is the process of the sun shining on the surface of the leaves, and that's why it's called photo, because of the light on the leaf, and shines on the leaf, and therefore it can synthesize or make food. And so you can describe it. And this is all from the level at which students learn things in school. They learn the term, and they even have the two parts of the term, the light synthesis, the light making food called light. And they are able to recite it back or even describe it. When I say describe, they are able to, that's not necessarily explaining. And that's the second level. And it's another level. Now, if you ask a person like that, oh, so what part of the leaf? Well, I think it's the surface. And what's in that leaf that makes it different? Well, I don't know. Or oftentimes the person, you might be able to describe what happened, but you can't really unpack it. You can't talk about it necessarily. But that's the ability to describe. We have 2 levels to go. The third level of knowing is where you're able to explain something. You're able to explain it. And so with photosynthesis, you can say, well, actually, on a leaf, there's the top side has kind of a smooth, maybe waxy surface, and when the sun shines on this, why there's a process occurs inside. There's actually called leaf factory. There are cells in there, and the bottom of the leaf actually has little air holes called stomata, and the leaf actually breathes in carbon dioxide and gives off oxygen, and in that process it makes food. And so you can explain it, and you might not even use the quote official word, you might not use stomata. And you know, you might say there's little holes in the bottom side. I forget what they're called, little holes there that take in air. And you know what? That person understands what it works. He doesn't necessarily have the words, have a term for it. Somebody else might say, stomata on the bottom side, top side has the waxy surface, and he might remember the terms, but not really know why those terms are used. So you get to the level of being able to explain something. And then, what's beyond that? So we have faint recall, ability to describe, you use the right words and pass the test. But the ability to explain, now you can say in your own words, maybe tell your little brother about it. What else could there be? What would the 4th level be?
Using, doing?
Yes, using or doing, yes. He calls it when knowledge is integrated. When it's integrated into your life, and you, at the highest level, it enlarges your understanding of the world around you. And so, for example, you might realize, oh, that means all the plants around us, plants in the forest, they're all breathing actually. These plants are breathing, and that's, forests actually they release oxygen into the air, and they take in carbon dioxide. And we learned in the last chapter that animals, they take in oxygen, and they breathe out carbon dioxide. And now the student may not make this connection, but you can make it with them. So if we took a room like this and sealed it, like, when you were in here, and we had some nice windows, right moisture and air, and you were sealed in here for a year with the right amount of plants that could survive, you and the plants together. And you would take very good care of those plants. If they die, you die, because the levels of carbon dioxide are going to go up, and you will die. And on the other hand, if you will die, the plants will not see you right there. But I was in Ontario the other year, and just above Lake Erie, they have huge greenhouses. So you probably know about them. And they have this developed to one point where they have this huge greenhouse full of peppers, hydroponically grown peppers. And they heat this greenhouse with natural gas at nighttime to keep it from freezing. And natural gas, when it burns, produces mostly, what it produces?
Water, carbon dioxide.
Water, carbon dioxide, correct. And they don't just let the carbon dioxide go off. They capture the carbon dioxide and compress it into tanks. And then what do they do with it? But now
They blow it over months.
in the afternoon, there's a formula for this. When the sun's out, they have meters somehow to measure the heat and temperature in the sunlight. And they release this carbon dioxide in the greenhouse in the optimum amount. And they raise the carbon dioxide percentage in the greenhouse. And the plants take it in, and the peppers grow faster than they would grow normally. Now, if there's too much carbon dioxide, that would be a problem. I don't know what the amount is, but you get the point. And there's an example of understanding laws and also ingenuity. And so this is an example where if you learn something new, yes, you can have a faint recall, you can then describe, you can explain, but then you can start you can integrate it into your life. You start making connections, applications. Oh, if this is the case, then this. And this all fits in with how the world works. Any comments? Isn't that interesting? Isn't that exciting? And the bottom line is that you're understanding how God's world works. And it is working. It's just that, the old saying that says something like this, some people wonder what's happening, and some understand what's happening, and some don't know anything is happening. And so there's lots of fascinating things happening that we're not aware of. And so one of the things of being a teacher is just being interested in the world around you. And so we see those fans there. So it doesn't make any difference which way they're rotating. Say, go this way, then what's the difference?
One way it blows the air more down, and the other way.
Yeah. And so, is there any preference for one or the other? Some are over here. Well, some of these things are reversible. Okay. All right. So now we have the four levels of learning. So on that last level, you learn that photosynthesis. And by the way, let me say this: there's a lot of lip service given today to teaching higher order thinking skills and making connections. And we don't want to lose teach rote learning. Well, that's true. I don't know that anybody would ever want children to just recite things and just parrot things back. However, a brick building, a stone building looks wonderful. But what do you have to have if you want to have a stone building? You got to have a stone building. And you can't understand the significance of photosynthesis if you don't know something about the parts of a plant and what actually happens. And so it's the building blocks of which you build your understanding often involve quite a bit of information. And you really can't, if you just give the conclusion, and so if you just tell students that plants are important, animals are important, they're interrelated, they need each other, are plants and animals both important? Why? They need each other, right? And why? Well, because the one makes carbon dioxide, the other makes oxygen. Okay, you remember that too. Well, actually, all you're doing there is parroting that back as a piece of information, but you really don't understand it. And so you really aren't any further ahead than you would be if you only knew some information down a lot of it. That's the mantra of the holes and leaves through which they breathe. So you need to build to conclusions. Now, and so at the lower levels, we talk about these 4 different levels. At the lower levels, knowledge often is no more than a collection of information. But it does have its purpose, because at the higher levels, our knowing opens our eyes to new insight into the world around us. And teaching involves making sure that the children get, collect, remember, understand whatever the information that they need in order to build concepts, in order to build understanding about the world around them. But the teacher does want to help students make those connections. Well, thinking then about, suppose you are supposed to teach something that you can hardly teach. It is true that, as I mentioned, some things that involve a process, you can't teach somebody how to do solve equations with 2 variables if you cannot solve equations with 2 variables. So there are those tasks that you simply must work hard at understanding yourself. And there's nothing wrong with letting your students know that this is a challenge to me. And if it's a challenge, we will work on this together. I will help you the best I can. Here's the problem, here's the challenge, and here's what we need to do. We know how to solve equations with 1 variable, equations with 2 variables. You can at least help them to think about what the difficulty is here. And it's kind of like we're working at this together. And we're going to look at this methodically, and you can show them how at least we need to approach this, and you work on it together. Now, something else to note is that, the fascinating thing is that in the public sector, to teach in the public school, kindergarten, you have to be certified. You have to have a teaching certificate, even to teach kindergarten, 1st grade. But you can be hired by a university to teach sociology or physics, whatever, and you don't need 1 pedagogy course. You don't need 1 course in teaching whatsoever. There's no requirement to have, so there are many scholars who actually end up teaching university level who really don't know how to teach. They're really not teachers. A scholar and a teacher are 2 different things. Some teachers are also scholars, some scholars are also teachers. But you can have a scholar who knows the subject, has done research on it, has written books on it, but he just is not a good teacher. How can that be? How can you be a scholar and know your subject inside out? but not be a good teacher. We've alluded to that briefly. What you said.
You're asking the question, how do you be a good scholar but not a good teacher?
Yeah, how can that be? How can you be a good scholar but not be a good teacher?
Then I'll ask another question. It's been going through my mind that connects with this. So, in those four, which one of those four do you see most lacking in teachers?
The one most of the four levels I gave. The one that's probably most lacking in teachers is the last one, where you actually help your students make the connections. Sometimes we talk about teaching what, so what, and now what. First level teaching, what? What is it to be known here? So you learn the what. And so what? Why does this matter? Why should I pay attention to it? Does this mean anything? Is there any value here? And then, so we can have so back to photosynthesis, the what would be, what really happens? Well, leaves breathe. Leaves could actually starve. If you cover a plant with a plastic bag, close it, the plant will die. It needs to breathe. Okay, that's the what. Well, then, so what? Why is that important? Why is that? Does that mean anything? Well, there's such a thing as plant health, and plants don't survive. They have to have the right amount of water and so forth. And the student can learn the so what and know a lot of things, but the now what? When you walk out of the room, now what? What does that have anything to do with how I live my life? Or what I do in the rest of my life. And the now whats are not as great in quantity, but they're what really count. Because you can have a lot of knowledgeable people who know quite a bit, but it doesn't somehow connect with how they live their life. And so, it could be driving for things. So, I knew if I go around the corner too fast, I'd go off the road. But hey, what's the hurry? And so, it didn't affect how I lived my life. So,
I have an interesting observation. So I'm just sitting here, kind of running this whole thing through here. So if you just fix this problem in school, we'd have so much less issues in our businesses. Because we have a lot of subject matter experts, and we're really hard time conveying that to the next. And so the tendency is to take your best subject matter expert that knows that the best and make him a manager over the other people doing that, and that's often doesn't work out.
Right.
Or you take a manager, one of your best managers, and turn him into a leader of managers. Well, that's a very different function, and so being able, that last piece, I assume that's the one you were going to say, the ability of taking that knowledge and transmitting it to another person. Is where it seems to fall apart, which is your question. Why do the scholar often, and just because you're a scholar doesn't mean you're a good teacher, it's just the disciplines are the same. Scholars knowing about the subject, teaching is knowing how to take that subject matter expertise and put it into another brain. So if you can fix that in schools, we can really have less issues at work.
You're right. I had a note here somewhere with the teacher compared to a salesman or an auctioneer. If you have a skilled auctioneer, all you need is something to sell. Oh, okay, what do you need sold here? This share. Oh, okay, give me $5. I can sell. You point to something, I'll sell. Or you're a salesman. If you're a salesman, you're a salesman. Got anything you want to say? Yeah, I'll sell. I want to sell puppies. Okay, I'll sell puppies. And so here's puppies, and here's a potential customer. And you can sell puppies. And next day you say, well, I'm out of puppies now. Down there's a used car lot. Go down there and sell parts. So if this guy is a salesman, he can conceivably sell anything. And there's certain principles he understands human nature, and does it make any difference? Can a salesman, if you're selling Japanese cars one day and you talk up the value of Japanese cars, can you with integrity switch over and sell GM 2 weeks later? Is that? Can you do that with integrity? What do you think? Does a salesman have to be invested to really believe in what he's selling? Or is selling kind of an activity that you do? You know, tell me what you want sold, and I understand people, and I can't sell it to her because women don't buy this kind of thing, but I'll sell it to you. What about that? Is there a selling? It's a salesman because he's a salesman independent of what he has to sell? Or is it object intensive? In other words, he's got to sell something that's deeply invested in real estate or. There's a reason I'm asking it comes over to teaching. Has anybody here been in sell? Okay, you sell.
That's some shits.
Sheds? Okay. Okay. Suppose it would be hard to sell parts. Could you just go ahead and
Oh, I
use
sold RVs. There are certain principles that apply to anything you can sell. You know what I'm saying? You sell best when you're deeply involved in the product. But you just understand the principles.
Okay. And you're not being hypocrite. You're not.
That's why I couldn't. I couldn't.
You couldn't sell sheds anymore because.
Well, the key thing you said is with integrity. Because
Okay.
you, I mean, a salesperson, when you see that line in the business world, hired salespeople, they think just because they were able to sell cars, they can sell sheds. Well, those make some of the worst shed sales. It's not selling like a car, it's not a car, right? So I think with integrity is your key word there.
Yeah.
But there's this slur that some of us teachers hear sometimes. It says those who can do and those who can't teach. Does that relate to being able to get from step 3 to step 4?
Yeah, I think so. Right. Because, and that's one of the reasons why there's so much turnover. Well, so, but if teaching involves managing the students as they work through some kinds of booklets, and you have to kind of ride her to make sure they don't throw chairs out the window and so on. Hey, you know, if you're a teacher at heart and you're in a situation where that's all you're able to do, you're going to see quick. So you know, give me a chance to teach. I do some substitute teaching. I was in actually Friday and Monday, and I've just got an email going to go to that Thursday. And if I get called into substitute, I feel best if I actually get to teach something. I actually get to teach something here, or am I simply kind of managing the class? You know, don't have a quiz and do a review sheet kind of here just to kind of ride her. Because a teacher is a teacher and wants to teach, and you want to interact with some subject and the students together, and that's invigorating for you and the students. And so, yes, moving on here. So the scholar, to be a teacher, you have to. The scholar tends to really emphasize his subject and himself. And actually, in recent years, I've been almost avoiding the word content like a plague. Because content suggests something that's inert, and of course it gets bad mouth because it's quote just content, and that really I much prefer the word subject, and I say we engage the subject because the subject is actually really dynamic or God's world, and there's an interaction with the subject. And you engage the subject together, the students and the teacher and the subject together. Because it's all part of God's world, and there's an interaction, and there's something for us to understand, and there's something that somehow integrates into how we live our lives. And And this involves learning some terms, it involves developing some skills, it involves using them, it involves training, it's multifaceted. And so, the teacher must not be discouraged by his limitations. What really matters is your attitude. When you're asked to teach something, you have to ask yourself, what mode? You know, some boom boxes, there's a mode there. You know, mode A, radio. Hit the mode again, CD. Hit the mode again. Old enough to remember boom boxes. Okay, you know what boom boxes. It's fascinating hearing there are people. Just recently, I asked a group, these were 20-somethings. You does not know what a dial tone is. I can ask you, if I see dial tone, does anybody just know what I'm talking about? Does not know what I'm talking about? Okay. Anyway, if you're going to use an analogy, so you hit mode. So the question is, what mode will I teach this in? Are we going to be in an adventure mode? Are we going to be in the in kind of discussion mode here? Or is this going to be explanation mode? I'll explain things, demonstrate something. What will be the mode, or will be a tour guide? And so, wrapping up the role of the teacher here, you always have to, when there's a new lesson for tomorrow, you want to reacquaint yourself with it. It doesn't matter how often we've discussed a story in the literature book or literature class. I always skim through the story or the chapter the day before just to have that fresh edge. Because the students know whether it's just warm leftovers or whether it's actually fresh. So you need to reacquaint yourself with it and make sure that to you it's fresh. And you decide which parts you're going to focus on of the story, because when you read a story, you also know your group. And so even if it's something as familiar as a hare and a tortoise, and you know the group, oh, with this group, I'm going to have you write parodies of this story. Or with this group, then we'll act it out. Maybe with this group, we'll do a discussion. There's all kinds of things you can do. And you won't necessarily do the same thing this time as you did the last time. So you consider it, so refresh the lesson in your mind. And then consider it in relation to this particular class. With this class, this year, how will we go about it? Even in math, will I send them to the chalkboard? Will I have them work in pairs? And then the third step is to actually plan the activities, plan the resources. Do you have to run off some papers, make a worksheet? What do you do? It was fascinating when the disciples, when Jesus' hearers, heard him, they were amazed because he taught as one who had authority. And this man somehow, he knows his subject, he knows what he's talking about. Okay, let's go to the law of the learner. The law of the learner, which would be the second actor here, is that the learner, here it is, the learner must attend with interest to the truth to be learned. The student, the learner, must attend, give attention, with interest to the truth to be learned. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Gotta get the attention. And with interest, and to the thing to be taught. Not to me, not to the sound in the ceiling, but to the thing to be taught. That's quite a challenge. And there's this little illustration in Exodus, I guess it was. Moses was out in the backside of the desert. And one day God had something he wanted to say to Moses. And how did he get Moses' attention?
Burning bush.
Burning bush, yes. I don't think a burning bush was that unusual. There probably were some scrub fires sometimes. I don't know if they had a lot of fires sometimes. But Moses noticed something. That bush is over there burning. It's still there. It's not getting more or less. And he went. And something got his attention. And in today's world, this is a bigger challenge than ever, is to get your students' attention. And some students are almost offended. And if you want theirs, why would I give my attention to you? And the technology we have is almost designed to distract attention. We'll have the whole subject itself. But Gregory talks about three levels of attention. So here we go. The first level of attention, think butterfly, flitting attention. Student, and you know, little children are that way. Something gets their attention, it's something colorful, or they play with something, and that's kind of fascinating, lots of bubbles. But after a while, we've seen what there is to see there. So something else gets your attention, and you put a little paper wads up there, playing, and after a while you have enough of that, so you're like, here and there, You're fleeting attention. And why do you pay attention to something? Because it attracts you somehow, and you wonder about it. But after a while, and often after a short while, your mind goes somewhere else. So fleeting attention. Now, the thing about fleeting attention is that it's given voluntarily by the pupil or by the person. You don't have to ask for it. So there is something good about that, but it's not enough for the long haul. Second level is focused attention. And focused attention involves the use of the will. As a teacher, we expect our students to get focused attention. So today we're going to learn how to do thus and thus. Let's look at this. And so you set up a problem, x equals 2x equals 16. And so we can consider that what that would be. The x could be like this box here. I'm not going to tell you what's in this box. However, there's some marbles in this box. I won't tell you how many are in here. But I will tell you this. If you double the number of marbles in this box, you'd have 16 marbles. And I see if you smile. Because you are engaged and you're thinking. What are you thinking? How many are you thinking? How do you know? I didn't tell you when you were in there. How do you know who's in? What did you do to get that?
I divided the number both sides.
Why didn't you want it? Why did it work?
It's not like that numbers.
Okay, that works. And so, but somehow, you've got to get the student's attention to the subject to be learned. One of the key things is sometimes you can get students' attention. You can do all kinds of strange things. You can stay with the water bottle in your hand and wave your arm. Then students are sometimes watching you like that. But what do they think? Well, that's strange. And they're thinking about, how could anybody be so interested in this topic? And you've got their attention, bro. They're not thinking about the subject at all. Your antics are actually distracting them from the subject. And so just because you have attention doesn't mean you have attention on the subject. So, but the focused attention is important. They're going to hear a lot of distractions. There'll be noises in the other classrooms. They're not going to give attention to them. But then the third level, which is ideal, the second level is a functional level. The third level is absorbed attention. It's absorbed attention. This is the level in which the child is so hooked into the subject that he can hardly get his mind off of it. And the illustration would be when a child is lost in a book. A child's reading a book and you try to get his attention and you have to say his name first. Susie. Oh, did you say my name? Yes, I said your name 3 times. Well, I was so absorbed in the story, I didn't hear you. Or a child is stacking blocks. It's possible for children to get so engrossed in what they're doing that they're absorbed. And this is possible with school subjects. It's possible you have the disciplined attention and then you try to move on to where you get them engaged with the subject, that the subject itself gets a hold of them and draws them into it. And so they actually wonder about it. And even after class is over, at the supper table, they might wonder about it. You know, the teacher said today that you never can suck water up a straw. pushed up. Is that true? You get them thinking about something like that, then they'll think about it when they get awake the next morning. Because, this thing kind of gets a hold of it. And so you can't do this with all subjects, but it is a goal to build attention. And so what we need to do is somehow get the students' active attention to the subject. And that's where ask for wisdom. You know, God is, the Holy Spirit is the teacher, and there are all different ways of getting students' attention on the subject. And you know human nature. Just recently I was substituting in Old Testament class. They were discussing children wilderness and talked about complaining. You know, and so you try to come up with a question: why would anybody ever complain? Have any of you complained in the last 2 weeks? Of course, the hands were up. And I said, "Breakfast hands go up, or would be some people who lied in the last 2 weeks." Why do you? And it drew it out of them. And I got answers like, "Well, you don't trust the person that's leading you." And they were engaged with the subject. And so, as a teacher, you think of questions that would somehow the student would get a hold of. Oh, yeah, I wonder about that. And so, you, as a teacher, to get them onto the subject, you could ask the question like, why is it that any time you double a whole number, you always get an even number? You double even numbers, you get even numbers. You double odd numbers, you get odd numbers. That'll happen every single time. And so it's so they try. Well, show it to me. Can someone tell me why is that? Well, I'll let you think about it. So, as a teacher, that's true. You double hit two whole numbers, you'll get an even number every single time. Okay, so finishing up here. So, some rules for applying this law of the learner. Number one would be focus on the lesson yourself. Give your attention to the lesson and show genuine interest in it. And so, you know how it is. If everybody starts looking at something, after a while, people start looking at it too. And so, as a teacher, you yourself focus on the lesson somehow and get your students to focus on it with you, whatever that point of the lesson is. And another one is to somehow get this pupil's attention. If their attention falters, well, get it back somehow. And sometimes it's necessary to give a bit of a break, a change of pace, because you do get tired focusing your attention. So sometimes a little joke or a story or a rabbit trail is refreshing. And oh wait, I think we'll stop there. Any comments? I think it's time to close, right? Yes.
I need to hear that rule again. Every time you double an even number, you get an even number. When you double an odd number, what happens?
Either.
Oh, either.
Either.
I thought I heard double odd numbers.
If you double whole numbers, you always get an even.
I done did the math and it works.
Yeah. Well, it didn't work because I heard it wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you don't get an even. Well, an odd number is always sets of pairs with the next one left over.
Yeah.
3 is 2 plus 1 left over. So you put them together, there's 2 ones left over, always make a pair. And so, okay.
I didn't know that.
Okay, thank you.